Hi, friends. Are you ready for our next immigration story? This story is called A Little Giant Comes to America. It is about a boy named Charles, and we're going to learn his story of when he came to America, okay? Look, there she is! With cries of excitement, the ship's passengers rushed to the railing. It was the summer of 1889 when this ship of European immigrants made its way into New York Harbor. In the distance stood the sight that they had dreamed of seeing, the Statue of Liberty, um, a symbol of freedom and hope, welcoming them to their new home in the United States of America. There were many push and pull factors that led many people to come to America. Some wanted their own farms or businesses, knew that there was a greater chance of doing that in America than in their old countries. Others came from poor places where finding food and shelter had been a desperate daily struggle. They hoped that if they worked hard in this new place, they and their families could be sure of warm meals and suitable places to take shelter and call home. Among the passengers was a man from Germany who, although an adult, stood only 4 feet tall. So I'm sorry, I said boy, but he's an adult, but he's only 4 feet tall. Whose body, instead of growing straight, seemed to bend to one side. His name was Charles Steinmetz, and he was a mathematician or expert in mathematics and an engineer, a person trained to design and build machines, bridges, or buildings. He was an engineer who was a person who was trained to design and build machines, bridges, or buildings. He had left his home in Germany for two reasons. First, he had trouble finding work in his homeland because he looked different. So these would be push factors, right? The reasons he's leaving his home. So he couldn't find jobs because he looked different. Many people did not understand that a powerful mind and a kind heart lay inside Charles's body. Second, Charles had written an article that his nation's government was to blame for many problems. In many countries, writing such an article could make a person in trouble. One day, a friend warned Charles, "My brother, who works for the government, says that police are going to arrest you and put you in jail." So remember, one of our push factors is people don't like the government and freedom, right? So he had no freedom to write that. He wasn't allowed to write that. In the United States, you can write articles like that. So that's one of the reasons. To avoid being sent to jail, Charles fled over the Alps, a large mountain range in Europe, to Switzerland. There, a friend of his named Oscar gave him a place to stay. Over dinner one night, Oscar said, "I am moving to America, Charles. Come with me. There you can find work and be free to write or say what you think." "If only I could," Charles sighed. "I cannot afford to buy a ticket." Oscar smiled. "My uncle moved to America and made a fortune. He is paying for my ticket. I wrote him. He has offered to pay yours too." Now, less than 2 months later, Charles and Oscar, along with many European immigrants, were sailing to New York Harbor on the east coast of the United States. Charles was too short to see over the heads of the other passengers, but Oscar cleared a path for him through the crowd. A minute later, the two friends stood at the railing, staring up at the statue whose lamp lit the way toward a new homeland. Beyond the Statue of Liberty, on its island in New York Harbor, was another island called Ellis Island. There were enormous buildings and docks on this island where ships could anchor and unload passengers. Charles thought, "That is Ellis Island. That is where American government decides who gets to enter the country and who might be turned away. I know that only a few passengers are turned away, those who are dangerous, sick, or do not have papers saying they can move to a new country. Will they let me in after my trouble back home? Will they look at the way my body bends to one side and say I am too small and weak to be welcomed to America?" What do you guys think? Think to yourself, what do you think is going to happen? Hours later, Charles stood in a huge room in a building called the Immigration Center. Long lines of immigrants waited to approach the rows of desks. This is where the government clerks would ask questions to determine whether the travelers would be allowed to enter the United States. In another part of the building, doctors waited to examine immigrants. Most people were allowed in, but Charles worried. "What will I do if they turn me away? I cannot return home. If I do, I will be sent to jail." Finally, he reached the head of the line. A government clerk asked him a question, but Charles did not understand English. The clerk called over an interpreter who knew many languages, including German. So an interpreter is someone who helps communicate. Using the interpreter to turn his English words into German, the clerk asked, What is your name? Charles said his name, and the clerk wrote it in a book. Then, without looking up, he asked, "Do you have a job waiting for you?" "No," Charles answered. "Do you have any money to live on until you find a job?" "No," Charles admitted. Now the clerk looked up at Charles and shook his head. "So you have no money and no job and you speak no English. I am sorry, but we want people who can add something to our nation." Just then Charles' friend Oscar stepped forward. "If you turn this man away," he said, "you will be making the greatest mistake of your life. This is Charles Steinmetz, one of the greatest scientific and mathematical thinkers in the world. He may only be 4 feet tall, but he has many talents. You want citizens who can improve this country? He can. I'm so sure of it that I will pay all of his expenses until he has a job." 2 hours later, Oscar's uncle welcomed Oscar and Charles into his big house in New York City. Soon afterward, Charles Steinmetz began to learn English and went to work at a large company, using his powerful mind to invent useful new products. He helped improve the country the way I'm sorry. He improved the way electricity is carried in wires in order to bring electric power to buildings and houses. He helped to make electric street lights to buildings and houses. He helped to make electric street lights possible and worked with the famous American inventor Thomas Edison. Charles wrote books that helped other scientists understand electricity. He made more than 200 scientific discoveries. So, the United States almost didn't let him in, but you can't judge a book by its cover, right? These discoveries made Charles Steinmetz famous and earned him a great deal of money. But he will never forget how other people had helped him. While continuing his scientific work, Charles began teaching at a college near New York City. He refused to take any pay for his teaching, saying, "Teaching others how to create useful inventions is the best way to repay the United States for taking me in." His friend Oscar understood. He explained, and years later, like so many others, Steinmetz came to America so he could help others with his talents and also have a good job and life for himself. That is why they call the United States the land of opportunity. Like many other immigrants, the move to America gave Charles a new chance of achieving something. Oscar continued, "I believe that each person brings something good to share. Putting all our talents together can make the United States and its citizens stronger and happier. Just think, that clerk at Ellis Island almost turned Charles Steinmetz away, right? He almost turned him away. Maybe we wouldn't have the electricity we do now." Charles Steinmetz and his friend Oscar were two of the 23 million immigrants who came to the United States between the years of 1880 and 1920. The majority of these immigrants were from the European continent. Like Charles, these European immigrants sailed into New York Harbor were registered into the United States at Ellis Island. Sometimes immigrants' names were recorded and changed or shortened to make them easier to say. And sometimes, as almost happened to Charles, immigrants were turned away if they were too sick or did not have the right papers. Can you imagine what your life would be like today if Charles Steinmetz had been sent back to Germany? Just like what I asked, right? Like, imagine if the United States sent him away, right? So, there were some push and pull factors that led Charles to the United States, right? He wanted freedom. He wanted to be able to, write what he wanted. He didn't really agree with the government, right? So that's kind of too, right? Freedom. He didn't like the government. So that's a push factor. He also didn't have a job, right? He didn't make any money. So that's another push factor. And he came to the United States for freedom and for a job and just for more opportunity, okay? There is a seesaw activity for you, so go ahead.